Going offshore could be the worst idea ever, says one commenter, who actually brings up some of the major fears and major concerns that I hear from folks from time to time about being a nomad capitalist, about how to reduce your taxes, about how to live overseas and how to take advantage of new opportunities. Well, today we're going to go through word by word one comment that touches on a lot of the hot button issues people have, touches on a lot of the fears, a lot of the concerns. We're going to start right now. Hey guys, I'm Andrew Henderson, and I'm bringing out the laptop for this one because I want to go through word by word and cover all of what is in this comment that basically says why going offshore could be the worst idea ever. Now, this comment is from a gentleman named Leon, and I'm going to go through and read the comment very quickly and then go through each of the arguments in the comment. So, Leon says, of course, going offshore will reduce your taxes. He put offshore in quotes for some reason. But people should be aware of major downsides, which Andrew doesn't mention here. You should ask yourself lots of questions, such as, can I continue to live in my home country? The answer is no. Can I spend any significant time in any other Western countries, such as UK, US, Australia, New Zealand? The answer is no. Are you prepared to deal with the hassle of foreign banks and the constant business and personal administration, which is forever changing? Do you want to spend months or even years setting up new structures that will make your life more inflexible than they were before you started? Do you want to live in countries with extremely different cultures, such as Malaysia, Montenegro, or Georgia, all of which are far less developed than what you're used to? Going offshore is a big deal. I know many people who've regretted spending the time and money simply to save on taxes. If you want to move abroad for many years, then going offshore can certainly be a good idea, but do not do it to simply save money. You'll regret it. I'm speaking from experience. Now, what I've said from the beginning, and I've said especially in recent years, is this is not for everyone. You know, what I've said is go where you're treated best is a variation of vote with your feet. And what I've said as a guy who comes from the United States, California, state with the most punitive tax enforcement agency on earth, some of the highest taxes on earth, the highest regulations, most difficult places for business, seemingly has attracted some 40 million people who decided that that was the best place to be. Now, I spent time in California doing business, and I heard a lot of people whining about how they wanted to get out. Just had a friend who 13 years after he told me he wanted to leave, finally left, went to another state. Listen, if you live in a place, you are voting with your feet. And so, you know, for most people, Nomad Capitalist is not for them. The same thing with entrepreneurship, which I've been doing since I was selling stuff door to door at 8 years old. That's not for most people. You know, I don't imagine that this is something that is for everyone. I think that what we talk about is if you are a successful entrepreneur, if you're a successful investor, the rules in the world are changing. Things in the West, things in the high tax countries are getting worse. Taxes are going to go up. Debt levels are going up. Freedoms are going down. And it's nice to at least have options. One thing I've been saying throughout this current situation that's going on right now is you may not want to move, but you want to have an option. You want to have a second passport that you can do without having to change your lifestyle drastically. You know, you might want to have some money in another country to protect yourself, because the bottom line of what we talk about here is having all your eggs in one basket is a bad idea, and having all your eggs in one country's basket is a bad idea. Now let's go through this word by word. Leon says, of course, going offshore will reduce your taxes, but people should be aware of the major downsides, which of course Andrew doesn't mention here. Well, Andrew has 900 videos. Just as a quick aside, Andrew has 900 videos. We can't make every video 7 hours long and cover all the caveats. You can go and watch any of the videos, and we cover most of the stuff in here. Now, you should ask yourself lots of questions. I happen to agree. I think talking to your spouse, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, your kids, whomever's involved in your plan, if you're not single, is important. I think planning is important. I think the problem with a lot of people, and I saw someone talking about this recently, is that a lot of people, especially kind of the digital nomad set, they just leave their country and figure, hey, what are they going to do to me? You should ask yourself a lot of questions. You should be prepared. You should be dialed in. You should make sure, number one, it's a good fit for you. And you should ask questions of, what do I need to do? Because this stuff needs to work holistically. Simply leaving your country and hoping the rest of it will work out is not really the solution. So you need to ask lots of questions. Now, those questions here are, can I continue to live in my home country? The answer is no. Somewhat true, depends on your country. There are different types of countries. We've talked about it here before. Some countries don't have tax. Some countries have a lump sum tax. Now, if it's your country, you probably are going to be ineligible for that. But there are certainly some people's countries are tax friendly. If your country's a Western country, then yes, you're going to be spending less time in your home country. How much less depends on the country. If the goal is spending 10 months a year in your country, that's going to be a tough putt for most people, right? Sometimes people will come to me and say, hey, Andrew, you know what? I'm willing to take a few vacations every year. Yeah, so are we all, right? That's not going to work, okay? You do need to spend time out of your country. Can you never go back to your country? Can you spend 0 days a year in your country? No, that's simply false. You can probably, in many cases, spend a number of months in your country. But is your lifestyle going to change if you want if you're running the average small business and you want to take advantage of offshore stuff? Yes, the answer is going to be yes, but it's not as draconian. You're not vowing to never return. You're not giving up your citizenship, which you don't have to. And so that's that. Can I spend any significant time in other Western countries such as the US, UK, Australia, and New Zealand? The answer is no. Again, largely true. The devil's in the details. And so we have had folks where through a lot of painstaking work on tax fronts in numerous different countries, people can largely live in the Western world. They're traveling between different homes that they own. We had one gentleman who was going between a couple of European countries, the US, and I forget the other one now. But his entire life was Western countries. Can you spend all of your time in one of these countries? Well, what we're not considering here is a growing number of Western countries have non-dom tax programs, lump sum tax programs where you pay one low fixed price, tax exclusions where a certain part of your income, or in some cases all of your income, is excluded from tax. There are some Western countries that have been lowering their taxes. You can run a corporation in that country and maybe the tax rate is 12 or 15%. There are countries like Andorra, there is Hong Kong, there's Singapore. There are countries in the EU that are making it a bit more favorable. So if you're paying 50% somewhere and you can go and pay even 25% somewhere else, you may not be zero, but there are options. And so I do think you can spend time in Western countries. The other thing that I would suggest, however, is what is this obsession with Western countries? Okay, for me, the beauty of this is, number one, knowing it's not permanent. If you want to do this for a year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, you can do that. When I started this journey, I said, I'm going to spend a year fully outside of the US. And I did that because I knew I wanted to do it permanently. But I wanted to give myself and my ego at the time the ability to just, to say, okay, I did my year, back I come, if I decided for whatever reason to cancel. You're not making decisions in the most cases for the rest of your life, okay? But what I would say, having that in mind is, I'm from Western country. Why do we need to focus only on Western countries? Why are so many people so concerned about this? And I'll tell you, what I've said is every country is a brand name. And so if you are living in the United States, or if you're living in Canada or Australia, you've probably been told this is as good as it gets. And there's nothing better, and if you go to the end of those other countries, you're going to be miserable. I can tell you personally, I like the increased levels of freedom. I like the lower cost of living. I like the nicer people. When I was a single, I liked the better social opportunities. I liked all those things outside of name brand countries. And so this idea that, not being able to go to New Zealand, if you're from New Zealand, I understand. For everyone else, I don't. I think you can live without New Zealand. Now, are you prepared to deal with the hassle of foreign banks? Quite frankly, I think a lot of the foreign banks, there are plenty of foreign banks that are a hassle, by the way. And I've just started to get rid of them. We keep a spreadsheet of over 1,000 banks that we deal with, and we call more than that every year and try and build relationships. I can tell you, I get a lot less hassle from my banks in emerging countries or in like Asian wealth havens than I do in the US. I've told the story numerous times when I sold my house in the United States and the escrow agent called and said, where should we wire you the proceeds? I said, can you send it to Singapore? And she's like, what's that? That's not a hassle, right? Someone who doesn't know like a significant country where that's located. Now, what I think people should be aware of is, when you're transitioning from one country's banking system to another, or when you're introducing a new banking system, obviously some things are going to be different. So for example, he mentions Georgia. We've talked a lot about Georgia, Armenia, countries in that region. What's different there is if you want a debit card, for example, in the US, you've just got a checking account and then you get a debit card attached to that. In Georgia, for example, it's here's your card account, in other European countries too. Here's your card account, and here's your current account, and here's a savings account, and you can like move money back and forth, but you might not keep a lot of money on the card, right? And so, or you might have to move money over to the card account, so that's a little different. But quite frankly, I think that the online banking in a lot of foreign countries is better. So I'm not really sure what the hassles are. There certainly are some banks that are a hassle, but not a lot. Are you also prepared to deal with the constant business and personal administration, which is ever forever changing? I'm not exactly sure what that means. Is business administration changing? Well, again, where I come from, the United States, a couple of years ago, they passed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. It was the biggest and really only, I guess, total tax reform in 31 years at the time. And what happened? Things changed. Forms changed. New procedures came about. And for a while, not everyone knew what to do, right? Because it was a new procedure. Happens all the time in different countries. It can happen onshore, it can happen offshore. Now, again, there's an importance to have a network of people overseas because, I, despite being out of the United States for many years now, still know a lot of the basics, Social Security and how does this work and how does that work. You may not know that stuff for a while, with your new UAE company or your new Hong Kong company or whatever. But you need people there who can help you make sense of it, make sure you're in compliance. And if you have the right people, this is what I spend my time doing, is going through people, testing people, figuring out who's good, getting rid of the rest. I think you can build a network of good people who can help you. The same way if you move to the United States, the way people like Leon say it's what everyone wants to do. If you move to the United States and you didn't know what to do there, you'd have to hire someone to help you. And so you can do that. Obviously, if you can't go to a country where there's not so many people there, then that may not be the best country. But there are, an innumerable number of options. Business and personal administration, I think things are changing everywhere. I'm not entirely sure what more to say about that. Do you want to spend months or even years setting up new structures that will make your life more inflexible than you were before you started? Again, if you're determined to make it inflexible, you can make anything inflexible. You can make your life as difficult as possible. Now, are you prepared to spend months or years? What I've talked about is, I wish there was a Nomad Capitalist when I was becoming the Nomad Capitalist. Before I even said, hey, I want to be the Nomad Capitalist, I was researching and studying and dipping my toe into this stuff. What it's taken me all these years to do, you could come to me. We generally help people when we're executing plans. We'll generally spend a year. That's what we provide. And we will execute a lot of the services in a matter of months, and some of them in a matter of weeks. And then there'll be extra time left over to wait for approvals or provide support. And so there's a big difference there between me, spending over a dozen years now studying this stuff, and someone else being able to do most of what I've accomplished in those years in a matter of months in many cases. Because we know what to do, we move quickly, we move efficiently. And so it doesn't have to take months or years. Now, if you want to go and get all your advice from a forum somewhere where they whine that people like me charge money, and they just want to, the worst thing that could ever happen to these people is ever paying someone $1, then yeah, you may. And you may realize that, Fart Sniffer 747 is not the offshore expert that he pretends to be in a keyboard. And it may take you months or years, right? But if it's being done properly with properly vetted people, it should not take you years to set up a structure. What I have seen as an issue is people set up a company. I had a guy a couple of years ago in Hong Kong. Couldn't figure out how to plug in a merchant account to a Hong Kong company. So it sat for 10 months while he ran around kind of going from person to person to person, trying to figure out how to make this whole thing work. Instead, if you figure out what to do beforehand, if you build the instruction manual beforehand, you make your own kind of like IKEA how to put the table together guide before you do anything, then you can just go out and build a table very quickly, and it won't take months or years. So the months or years is not really how it's going to work. Now, is your life going to be less flexible? I don't know. I quite frankly don't see the difference between running a corporation in one place and a corporation in another place. Again, it takes some time to adjust to. And it's part of the reason why people ask me, Andrew, why don't you talk to people who are making $50,000 a year? Well, because if you're making $50,000 a year and your tax bill is $4,000, it may not be worth the hassle for $4,000. But if you're making $50,000 a week, I think you can figure out a different internet banking login, when it comes to, saving $1 million a year. Now, do you want to live in countries with extremely different cultures, such as Malaysia, Montenegro, or Georgia, all of which are far less developed than what you're used to? Yes, actually, I personally do. Now, do you? One thing that's been interesting as I've gone all around the world is I've noticed we are different. Different countries do have different cultures. I tend to find that outside of the Western countries that this gentleman holds in high esteem, you have a lot more freedom. They leave you alone. I like that. And again, I think people are nicer in some of these places. Not all of them, but some of them. Malaysia is an example. Is the culture extremely different? In some ways, no. In some ways, we're all human beings. There's a lot of similarities. Now, there are certainly countries where it is extremely different. I was in Vanuatu a couple years ago. I would not live in Vanuatu. Some people like it. They like, it's on the edge of the world and it's beaches and it's kind of rugged. It's not for me. I can overlook the fact that, on the other hand, Malaysia certainly is an example. There is some different culture. The one thing I've had the hardest time adapting to is that outside of the Western world, people are a bit more laid back. They may not be as timely. If you go to Colombia, for example, right? Everyone's 2 hours late. There are countries that are just not in a hurry. And so I'm a pretty type A guy, and that's been frustrating at times. So there certainly are differences in culture. What I can tell you is I grew up in the United States and I never felt like I belonged in that culture. Do you know what I didn't like about that? I didn't like grown women coming up to me and making fun of me for wearing a scarf. So you know what? On that point, having a different culture was actually a good thing for me, where it's like, oh, you wear a scarf. That's cool. Nice scarf. Right? So I think for some people, you'll see benefits. You'll see some drawbacks. For me, the answer is yes, I do want to live in these countries. Now, are they far less developed than what you're used to? Quite frankly, it's interesting. I had a friend of mine who went back to visit where he's from in the American Midwest. He lives in Eastern Europe. Went back, he was driving in the Midwest. He said, the roads are better in Eastern Europe. The world is changing. And I've said this many times. Malaysia, 25 years ago, you wouldn't live there. Now you can. And so, if you're just looking at the perspective of, people who don't travel, I'm not saying this gentleman doesn't, but I'm saying just the greater population is not traveling. They're not out there, they don't know what's going on in Malaysia or Georgia. And so, it's just less developed. These countries are really picking up, some of them. You go and drive anywhere in the Middle East, you're going to see the most pristine roads you've ever seen. Georgia, they did a great job. Mikhail Saakashvili, speaking at Nomad Capitalist Live, president of Georgia, reformed the place. A lot of great roads. Now, if you're driving in some village, maybe, but this idea that development in the United States, I can tell you, right down the street from my house in Kuala Lumpur, is probably the world's #1 mall. You've never seen more places to eat or shop or spend money or buy the most expensive stuff you've seen. You want to buy a $40,000 kitchen table? There you go. So, you may not have Amazon. You have an inferior version of Amazon. But in terms of development, the things that you're looking for, some of the best hospitals in the world, some of the best malls in the world in Asia, all over the world, I think you're seeing a lot more development than you used to. And I think some people don't want that much. Maybe they don't want as much development. Maybe they want their freedom. Maybe they want that. But I think there's something for everyone where you can deal with the culture, you can deal with the development, and it's going to be a lot easier than you think in most cases if you're willing to dip your toe in and have an open mind. Now, going offshore is a big deal. I happen to agree with that. I know many people who've regretted spending the time and money simply to save on taxes. And so, whether you'll regret it, listen, it's unfortunate that Leon regretted it. And perhaps, Leon thinks that, by telling you how he regrets it, that you're going to say, well, that's right, just forget the whole thing. And listen, if seeing a comment on YouTube says forget the whole thing, then you know what? You should. For some people, I'll be honest, there are some people who are in this audience, some people who are watching this video right now. This is a fantasy. This is a way to sit and escape the world. It's a way to say, imagine I had passports, and you picture yourself on like a cigarette boat going down, the Bosphorus with your, supermodel girlfriend, and having your 3 passports, and telling people about your Monaco bank account, right? There are some people who that's what this is. And, it seems nice, but the minute it comes to doing something, they're not going to. And so, what I've learned is everyone's going to have a different experience. What I've also learned is if you do this, it doesn't have to be forever. But I think that if you have the mindset that this can be just as good of a way to live, you can save a lot of money, which can go to build your net worth, create wealth. You can do so in a more diversified way, taking advantage of opportunities that are all around the world versus just investing where you're from, where probably the yields aren't as good and the returns aren't as good. The government is more apt to come in and just take your investment, because that does happen in the US and other countries. This is the opportunity you have, is to go out and to do that. If that doesn't appeal to you, that's fine, and we can still be friends, and I'm happy to entertain you with these videos. I wanted to share this with you because I think it's worth seeing an alternative view. What I've also said is, for me, it's not just about tax. In fact, what I've said before is my initial desire to do this had nothing to do with tax. It had to do with cost of living, better social opportunities, just feeling like I fit in. And also, once I started visiting 3 or 4 countries, I said to myself, I want to see where the opportunities are in the world. I remember going to China and Hong Kong and saying, like, wow, this is the future. Asia is the future. And I wanted to be a part of that. You may not want to be a part of it, but the bottom line is you can pick and choose what you want. That's why Go Where You're Treated Best is so relevant. You can just make those investments. You can stay living where you live now. If you want to do the full Monty, you can go overseas, dramatically reduce your taxes, save a bunch of money, invest that, grow wealth. Quite frankly, from my perspective, I don't think you're going to like your life any less. I think you'll find that your life may be different. The outcome may be different, but you actually can end up pretty happy if you go into it with an open mind. So those are my thoughts. I'd like to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below. What do you think? What good points do you think that I made? What good points do you think Leanne made? What are your concerns? What are you scared of? I want to know. Maybe this is just something that's entertaining for you. And if you want to comment on that, then I'd be happy to hear about that too. I want to hear what you think about this. How can Nomad Capitalist help you? 4 ways. Number 1, subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell to make sure you get our new video every day. Number 2, get a copy of Nomad Capitalist, the book. You'll learn a lot of my personal experiences over a dozen years of studying this stuff, as well as exactly some of the strategies that you can use to build your Nomad Capitalist plan. Number 3, if you're not sure where to start, but you want to come and learn from my team and I, you want to come and mingle with like-minded people, learn more about our live conference, Nomad Capitalist Live. It's coming up soon. And number 4, if you want some help right now because you've got a burning issue, you need something solved, you want to lower your taxes, get a second passport, or build the Nomad Capitalist lifestyle of your dreams, go to nomadcapitalist.com and click on Become a Client.